Welcome to Cozy Conversations with Miss Dani, where soulful vibes meet authentic stories. I'm your host, Coach Dani, here to guide you through heartfelt discussions on healing relationships and personal growth. Sit back, relax, and let's dive into a space where real talk meets inspiration. This is your time to unwind, connect, and grow. Let's get cozy. So get cozy. Let's get it cozy. Let's get cozy. Let's get cozy. Let's get cozy. Let's get cozy.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to the deep dive. So this time around, we're looking at how our childhood relationships, especially with our parents, can really impact our romantic relationships as adults. And we're going deep with this episode of Cozy Conversations with Mrs. Dani, where Coach Dani really gets personal about how this has shown up in her own life.
Yeah, this is something that I see a lot in my own practice too. So many people are carrying around these invisible wounds from their childhood that are shaping their relationships in ways they don't even realize.
Totally. And Coach Dani is so open about her own experience. Like, she talks about this pattern she had of always ending up with guys who were emotionally unavailable or critical or even controlling. And she traces it right back to her relationship with her father.
That's such a classic example of how attachment styles play out in adult relationships.
Okay, so attachment styles, everyone's talking about them these days. Can you give us a quick breakdown of what that actually means?
For sure. So basically the idea is that the way we interact with our caregivers, especially when we're really young, creates this kind of blueprint for how we approach relationships later in life. So imagine a child who grows up consistently getting love and care and attention from their parents. They're more likely to develop what we call a secure attachment style, which basically means they feel comfortable getting close to people and they generally trust that their needs will be met in relationships.
Makes sense. But what happens when those early experiences aren't so great?
Well, that's when we start to see those insecure attachment styles emerge. And it can manifest in a few different ways. Some people become super clingy and anxious in relationships because they're constantly worried about being abandoned or rejected, while others might swing the other way and become really emotionally distant and avoidant because they've learned that it's safer to protect themselves by not getting too close.
Right, and that ties directly into Coach Danimarie's experience. She describes her father as being pretty emotionally unavailable and critical growing up. And there's this one line that really stuck with me. She says, "When we don't heal the wounds of our inner child, we let that wounded little girl run the show." I mean, whoa.
That's so powerful, right? Because it's like we're still carrying around these unhealed parts of ourselves that are holding on to the pain and the unmet needs from our childhood. And if we're not aware of them, those wounded parts can totally sabotage our relationships without us even realizing it.
So we're basically trying to recreate familiar dynamics, even if they weren't healthy. Because on some level, it feels comfortable.
Exactly. It's like we're on autopilot, drawn to what feels familiar, even if it's ultimately going to hurt us.
And I guess that can show up in different ways too, right? Like maybe we're constantly seeking validation from the wrong people or trying to fix our partners or even sabotaging perfectly good relationships because deep down we don't feel worthy.
All of the above.
Coach Dani also talks a lot about forgiveness, especially forgiving her father.
Yeah.
But isn't that like letting him off the hook for how he treated her? I kind of struggle with that.
That's a really common concern, and it's something that Coach Dani addresses head on. What I think is important to remember here is that forgiveness doesn't necessarily mean condoning what happened or saying that it was okay. Sometimes forgiveness is more about freeing yourself from the weight of that past hurt.
Okay, so it's less about the other person and more about letting go of that anger and resentment that we've been carrying around.
Exactly.
And for Coach Dani Marie, forgiving her father was a huge step in her own healing journey.
She's really clear, though, that it wasn't about saying that what he did was okay. It was about releasing herself from that burden so she can move on.
Makes sense. But how do you actually do that? Like, what did forgiving her father look like in real life?
Well, she talks about therapy prayer and a lot of self-reflection.
Therapy, isn't that just for people with, like, serious problems?
That's a really good question, and it's different for everyone. I mean, therapy can provide a structured and supportive environment to explore those deep wounds and develop healthy coping mechanisms. But there are also other paths to healing, right? Like journaling, meditation, or even just honest conversations with trusted friends or family. It's about finding what works for you.
So therapy was one tool,
Mm-hmm.
but Coach Dani Marie also found strength in her faith, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Prayer or any form of spiritual practice can be a huge source of strength and comfort, especially when dealing with something as painful as childhood trauma.
And I guess it can also help us to connect to something bigger than ourselves.
Definitely.
It's that reminder that we're not alone in our struggles. And what about this self-reflection piece? What did that involve for Coach Dani Marie?
Self-reflection is all about turning inward and paying attention to your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. It's about becoming more aware of the patterns that might be holding you back. For her, it was a lot of journaling, meditating, and just taking time for quiet contemplation to really connect with her inner world.
You know, this reminds me of a time when...
I want to hear this.
So I was in this relationship, and it was just constant drama. Looking back, I can see that I was totally recreating the dynamic I had with my mom growing up. But at the time, I was completely blind to it. It wasn't until I started therapy that I even realized what was happening.
It's amazing how we can have these blind spots, isn't it?
Yeah, we totally do.
And that's why self-awareness is so important. It's
Yes.
about recognizing those blind spots, those toxic habits we fall into, and making conscious choices to break free from them.
And it sounds like a major turning point for Coach Dani Marie was confronting her pain head on and recognizing her own worth. It's like she finally stopped blaming herself and started challenging all those negative beliefs she'd internalized about love.
That's such a vital step in breaking free from those unhealthy patterns.
For sure. It's about building self-compassion and learning to set healthy boundaries. It's about looking in the mirror and saying, I deserve better than this. But how do you actually do that? What did setting boundaries look like for Coach Dani Marie?
That's a great question, and we'll dive deeper into that after a quick break. So for Coach Dani Marie, setting boundaries was like this huge turning point. She realized that she'd been letting people just walk all over her for years, partly because she didn't believe she deserved any better.
I think we've all been there at some point, right? Where we let people treat us less than we deserve.
Yeah.
It's like we're afraid to say no or speak up for ourselves.
Exactly. And for Coach Dani Marie, setting boundaries wasn't about being selfish or mean. It was about respecting herself and her needs, like protecting her own well-being.
Okay, so that makes sense in theory. But what did setting boundaries actually look like for her? Did she have like a big confrontation with her dad or something?
It wasn't about one big dramatic moment. It was more like a series of small but really powerful shifts. You know, like she started saying no to things she didn't want to do, and she stopped letting people take advantage of her kindness, and she started communicating her needs more clearly and assertively.
So it was less about dramatic showdowns and more about consistently showing up for herself. I'm trying to work on that myself. It's so easy to just go with the flow, even if it means sacrificing your own happiness.
Totally. But you know what Coach Dani Marie found was that setting boundaries actually improved her relationships. The people who genuinely cared about her respected those boundaries, and the ones who didn't, well, maybe they weren't meant to be in her life anyway.
That's such a good point. We often worry that setting boundaries is going to push people away.
Yeah.
But really, it helps us to attract the right people, the ones who are actually going to treat us with respect.
Absolutely. And you know, Coach Dani Marie also found that setting boundaries freed up so much energy and space in her life. Instead of constantly trying to please others or fix their problems, she could finally focus on her own happiness and well-being.
It's like that saying, you can't pour from an empty cup,
Right.
right? You have to take care of yourself first before you can truly show up for others.
Exactly. And self-care isn't selfish. It's essential. Coach Dani Marie talks about how she started prioritizing things like exercise, healthy eating, and spending time in nature. These weren't just indulgences for her, they were investments in her overall well-being.
That reminds me of this time I was going through a really tough breakup. And I was so focused on trying to fix things with my ex that I totally neglected myself. I wasn't sleeping, I wasn't eating right, and I was just a mess. It wasn't until I started making time for things that actually brought me joy, like painting and going for walks, that I started to feel like myself again.
It's so important to remember that self-care can be a real lifeline, especially during tough times.
Yeah, sure.
And, Coach Dani Marie's story also highlights the importance of finding healthy coping mechanisms for dealing with stress and difficult emotions. She talks about how she used to try to numb her pain with things like shopping or overeating, but those habits only made things worse in the long run.
So she had to find healthier ways to deal with those uncomfortable feelings. What did that look like for her?
She talks about journaling, meditation, spending time in nature, but she also found a lot of support in therapy. She realized that she didn't have to go through this alone. Having a trained professional to talk to someone who could offer guidance and support made a huge difference in her healing journey.
Yeah, I think there's still so much stigma around therapy.
Right.
But Coach Dani Marie is so open about her experience. It's really refreshing.
It is. And it's so important to normalize these conversations about mental health. Therapy can be an incredible tool for healing and growth, and it's nothing to be ashamed of.
Totally. So we've talked about setting boundaries, practicing self-care, and seeking support when we need it. What other insights did Coach Dani Marie share about her healing journey?
One of the most powerful things she talks about is the importance of changing her inner dialogue. She realized that she'd been carrying around all these negative beliefs about herself, beliefs that were basically rooted in her childhood experiences. And she made a conscious effort to start challenging those beliefs and replacing them with more positive and empowering ones.
It's like she was literally rewriting her own story.
Yeah.
But how do you actually do that? It's easy to say think positive, but how do you actually change those deep-seated beliefs
Yeah.
that have been with you for years?
That's where the self-reflection piece comes in. She started paying attention to her thoughts and noticing those patterns of negativity. And whenever she would catch herself thinking something like, I'm not good enough or I don't deserve love, she would consciously challenge that thought and try to replace it with something more positive, like an affirmation like, I am worthy of love or I am enough just as I am.
So it's about catching those negative thoughts before they spiral out of control and consciously choosing to focus on something more positive and empowering. I love that. But did it actually work? Did changing her inner dialogue actually make a difference in her life?
It totally did. Coach Dani Marie talks about how she started to see herself differently, and that shift in perception changed everything. She started showing up differently in the world, and she started attracting different kinds of people into her life.
So her inner transformation led to an outer transformation. Her relationships, her career, her overall happiness, it all started to shift.
That's so inspiring. What else did Coach Dani Marie have to say about the impact of her healing journey?
But one of the most noticeable changes was in her romantic relationships. She stopped attracting those emotionally unavailable, critical partners. And she started attracting men who were kind, respectful, and capable of meeting her emotional needs.
Wow, that's huge. But was it just about the men she was attracting, or did she also change the way she showed up in those relationships?
She definitely changed the way she showed up. She stopped trying to please everyone or fix their problems. She learned to communicate her needs clearly and assertively. And most importantly, she stopped settling for less than she deserved.
I think that's such an important message for everyone listening. It's not just about finding the right person. It's about becoming the right person yourself. It's about healing those inner wounds so you can show up in relationships as your best, most authentic self. Absolutely. And Coach Dani Marie's story is such a powerful reminder that it's never too late to heal and create the life you deserve.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
But it couldn't have been easy, right? I mean, her story is so inspiring. But I imagine there were times when she wanted to give up. Did she share anything about the challenges she faced along the way? It's easy to look at someone like Coach Dani Marie and be like, wow, she's got it all figured out. But I'm sure her healing journey wasn't all sunshine and roses, was it?
Oh, definitely not. I mean, she's very open about the fact that healing is a process. It's not like this quick fix. There were definitely days when she felt like she was taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back. And she talks about the moments of doubt, the frustration, the anger.
That makes it so much more relatable, though, knowing that even someone who seems to have it all together still struggles sometimes. Yeah.
It's so important to remember that. We often see these like curated versions of people's lives, especially online. And it's easy to compare ourselves and feel like we're not doing enough or we're not good enough. But Coach Dani Marie's story is such a good reminder that we all have our own journey, our own unique set of challenges.
Did she share anything specific about those tough parts? Like what helped her to keep going when things got really hard?
She talks about those days when like even getting out of bed felt impossible, when the pain was just so overwhelming that she just wanted to hide from the world. But she also talks about the things that kept her going. her faith, her commitment to herself, the support of her loved ones.
I love that she had that support system. It's so important to have people you can lean on when things get tough.
It really is. And she also talks about the importance of giving herself grace. Realizing that healing isn't about being perfect. It's about making progress, even if it's slow and messy.
Yeah, there's so much pressure these days to have it all figured out, to be successful and happy all the time. It's so refreshing to hear someone talk about the messy parts of life,
Mm-hmm.
you know, the parts we don't usually see on social media.
Totally. It's about embracing the full spectrum of human experience, right? The good,
Mhm.
the bad, and everything in between. Coach Dani Marie's story is a powerful reminder that it's okay to not be okay, and that asking for help is actually a sign of strength, not weakness.
It sounds like she really had to lean on her support system, her faith, her friends and family, and she even went to therapy. I think that's such an important takeaway for our listeners. We don't have to suffer in silence. There are resources available, people who care, and tools that can help us navigate those difficult times.
And what strikes me most about Coach Dani Marie's story is that it's ultimately a story of hope. I mean, she went through some incredibly painful experiences, but she came out on the other side stronger, wiser, and more connected to herself.
It's like she turned her pain into purpose. And now she's using her platform to share her story and inspire others to heal.
Exactly. And her message is so clear. Healing is possible. It might not be easy, it might not be linear, but it's possible. And on the other side of that healing, there's so much potential for deep and meaningful connection, not only with others, but most importantly with ourselves.
That's so beautiful. It's about recognizing our own worthiness, setting healthy boundaries, and creating a life that feels authentic and fulfilling. It's about showing up for ourselves with the same love and compassion that we offer to others.
You got it.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from Coach Dana Marie's story?
If there's one thing I hope you remember, it's that you are not alone. We all have wounds, we all have baggage, and we all have the capacity to heal. And it starts with taking that first step, acknowledging those wounds, and choosing to believe that you are worthy of love and happiness. And if Coach Dani Marie's story resonated with you, if you're feeling ready to start your own healing journey, please don't hesitate to reach out for support. There are resources available, there are people who care, and there's a whole community of people out there who are rooting for you. You got this.